Do you remember doing a strip for Doctor Who magazine back in the day about Ghostlight?
Yeah, that was the strip that we did called Comic Assassins, which was
Mm.
parodies of the current episodes.
Punchline was, don't worry, I'm sure it'll all be explained in part four, which I think is absolutely perfect because Ghostlight is such a good story, but on the other hand, it is also total gibberish.
Hey, listen, guys, we've not started yet. Let's start, and then anything we say now, I'll try and steer it back to our topic, which is, of course, comics. Comic Cut. We're looking at a panel, and we comprise a panel. There's a few of us, so the panel sees a panel, and we talk about the comics from the panel we discuss, and we call it Comic Cuts. Hello, and welcome to Comic Cuts, the panel show. I'm Kev F, and my guests today are Dan McDaid and Sapphira Olson.
Hello.
Sapphira, you have been traditionally published and self-published, am I right?
Traditionally published with my novels and then self-published with my comics. Yes. Part of the reason for that is when I first started writing novels and things, it took me 6 years to get a publisher because it is phenomenally hard. It's like running into a brick wall repeatedly and going, I can do that again. That was fun. There's blood everywhere. But after 6 years, I managed to get a publishing contract. And then much later, I started doing comics a few years ago, I just didn't have it in me to pound at corporate doors like that anymore. I thought, and I just did it myself. And Richard Starkings was really nice to me and helped me and did the lettering for me and helped me put it together and everything. So it's like, oh, I've got a bit of help. I'm not on my own. So yeah, I just went for it.
I think self-publishing now leads the way.
I've loved it. So doing I did Kickstarters for both issue 1 and 2, which were like phenomenally successful. More successful than I've been writing novels for about 20 years. The comic on the Kickstarter, with the support of a few key people in the industry that took me under their wing, was like the most successful thing I've ever done. I was like, what? But even now, they still get some reaction. I was talking to one, I won't name him, in America, a comic artist guy, and he was like, oh, is this like a vanity project for you then, Saf? And I was like, bloody cheek.
That is how people certainly used to think. I mean, when I started getting into the business, and I was getting into the business about, I would say, 10 years before you were, Dan. And when you were joining the business, it was beating down the doors of the big guys, and you got a break. Who did you get your break with first?
I got 2 breaks in fairly kind of quick succession. I was just thinking about this today because of the Doctor Who news, but my first break was really with Doctor Who magazine. And I sent them a strip that I had done, and I had no particular intention of developing the strip further. It was really just a calling card to say, look, I can write, I can draw, so like, give me a go. And I didn't expect to hear back from them at all. And I think I got lucky in terms of timing that my pitch, it was like I said, it's a strip and a few sort of pin-ups to show I could draw the characters. It turned up on their slush pile exactly the right time. I think they just had a big clear out, so suddenly the slush pile is not that big, and so it lands right there on the top. And they phoned me. I think I sent it on. Oh, this is so long ago now. I think I sent it on the Tuesday, and they phoned me on the Thursday, which is absolutely unprecedented. But I remember I was asleep in bed. I'm allowed to swear.
Go for it.
Yeah, and I was completely bollock naked because I was in bed, and I heard the phone call. I heard the phone ring from the other room, and the other room was down this long corridor. And I just had a feeling like the phone, even back then, the phone almost never rang. Everything would either be a text or an email. And I just had a feeling that this phone call was going to be something special. And I ran down the corridor, my bollocks swaying in the wind.
Do you know, there's a point at which it's too much information.
No, I don't think so. I think the more I dump in this, the better it's going to be. But anyway, and I took the phone call. And it was Clayton Hickman, the then editor of Doctor Who magazine, and he talked me through it. And he was like wonderful. But he basically gave me sort of a job interview. And when I was sitting there, it's one of the weirdest job interviews of my life, because I was sitting there completely starkers on the phone, answering all these kind of questions, and that was my big break, and it just sort of went from there. And then a couple of months later, I went in for a comic book competition on comic book resources.
Oh, is this Comic Book Idol?
That's right, Comic Book Idol, that's right. And that led to, and there are a lot of American comic editors looking at that, and that led to sort of work kind of flowing from that. And it's funny, Sapphira, you're talking about vanity publishing. I sort of feel like comics are so small, it's really all vanity publishing to some extent. You get a few massive breakout hits, but generally speaking, everyone is sort of like doing it in their own like in their own bedrooms, in their own
Yeah.
studies or whatever. You know what I mean? It's all quite sort of small fry, and then occasionally something will blow up or kind of cross over.
There was recently the survey by the former comics laureate, Hannah Berry, and
Kind
she
of area.
surveyed all we writers and artists and asked who was making a living from comics. The answer is next to nobody.
Nobody, nobody.
But
That's right,
interestingly,
nobody.
just this week, someone shared online a fanzine article from 1979 interviewing Dan Adkins, who is a guy whose name I knew. He used to ink quite a lot of comics, and he drew some comics as well in the 60s and 70s. And in 1979, he shared what his earnings were. And he basically hadn't been able to make a living from working for Marvel Comics and being a name that you'd heard of. So it's forever been the worst job in the
Yeah,
world.
it really is a terrible, terrible job. And it's so bad for your mental health, and it's so bad for your physical health.
Very isolating.
You're so isolating, yeah, and you don't see anybody, and except for the very few occasional sort of conventions that you can afford to go to, which may be like one or two a year, you don't even really meet any of your peers either. So I have to sort of rely on my partner, who's a teacher, for like office gossip. She comes home and I'm like, so what happened today? Tell me what happened today. Oh no, that's terrible. And I really sort of like kind of like join in.
For it.
And Sapphira, you're even further afield. You feel a little bit more remote because you're in Liscard in Cornwall. Am I right?
Oh, lovely, Liscard, lovely.
This guy is lovely.
I don't know if Kev has done this on purpose, but I'm also a Cornish lad. I'm from Cornwall originally. I'm from Redruth.
Did
Yeah.
not know.
Yeah,
Really?
yeah. Can you not tell from my Cornish face? Look how Cornish I look. I haven't got a Cornish accent. I've lived in Scotland for 20 years. I don't have a
I
Scottish
lived in
accent.
Scotland. Where did you live in Scotland? Sorry, Kev. Where did
That's not. I'm living in Dundee. I've lived in Dundee for 20 years.
Dundee. We're back to where my family come from. Gran took photographs for the Dundee Courier
There you go.
and the other D.C. Thompson local papers.
There you go. It's a small country, isn't it?
Well, listener at home, if you'd like to plot all these points on a map.
Oh, it's insane. You drive yourself crazy by plotting these points on a map.
You'll see exactly how long the British Isles are, and then you'll win that quiz when someone asks. Now, my two guests have brought in to this, your favourite podcast about comics, they've brought in with them a panel from a comic or something close, and we're going to see if we can identify it and talk about it. Maybe we'll learn something about comics and our guests, or maybe we'll just show off a bit and have a fun chat. Let us see. We've discovered the parts of the country we come from. Let's see what comics we like. I think one of our suggestions is going to be slightly more obscure than the other, but they both, I confess, foxed me. I'd like to begin by sharing Dan's image.
Yes.
Now, Dan, you've begun with a close-up, which, unusually for comics, doesn't feature any actual people. Listener at home, you'll be able to find this on the holding image, you'll be able to find it on the website. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll be able to see it now. But you shouldn't need to do any of that because Sapphira Olson is about to describe what we're looking at.
We are looking at some, I don't know, like what the words are, and admitting your foolishness is the first step to the path to true wisdom, my son. And it's like, it looks like thorns or spiky things coming out of the sun or something, and someone below going,
It does, doesn't it? And for me to add my technical take on it, for the listeners who perhaps study line and technique, I can say that this is from an American style comic where it's been drawn in black outline and then has had some colour added to the top of it. The words with the big quote at the top are in blue. There's a couple of voice bubbles at the bottom of the picture. One of them is saying "who dash question mark exclamation mark," and the other voice bubble is saying "do not be alarmed" in an oddly shaped voice bubble. We're going to look now at the full picture when you pull back to reveal everything that's in it. Now tell us what you see.
it's soups. That voice from nowhere. Yeah, everywhere. Who do not be alarmed, friend.
For the listener at home, the soups doesn't refer to two soups that may be delivered from a trolley.
Yeah, it's not soup. Yeah.
It is Superman.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, soups. And Kev, they do not be alarmed friend bit I didn't read out because it was over your
Oh, I
picture.
see.
You were above it. So it's like, here's Kev. Do not be alarmed, friend.
And can you identify who it is who's saying "Do not be alarmed," Sapphira?
No, sorry.
Well, I'd say that's the Phantom Stranger. I'll leave it to you, Sapphira, to have the first guess. What comic do you think this comes from?
I don't know. Superman issue 3 from 1927. I don't know.
Well, that's what you call a left field take. I'm going to make my suggestion. Looking at the colouring, this is either a reprint of something which was coloured with much more shaky looking colouring in the 80s, or it's something which wasn't published until the 90s or 2000s. And I can't for the life of me tell you which one is which, but it's very flat colours, which is how it was done in the olden days of the 1980s and earlier. So I'm going to say it's a 1980s comic that's been then later reprinted. So the colours have gone flat and garish. The artist, it's hard to say because they're very small drawings of Superman and the Phantom Stranger, and they're far away in their landscape. The inking of the landscape has got an interesting texture to it, suggesting to me that one person penciled and one person inked. The sky, the stars, have got spatter in them. I think those stars have been created by someone with a toothbrush with white paint on them, which is how I used to do it when I was inking Marvel comics and sharing a studio with Mark Buckingham. And nowadays, you don't do it that way. I'm going to say it's, and I don't know what it's from, I'm going to say it's penciled by Jim Starlin and inked by Alfredo Alcala. Dan.
You are dangerously close.
Dan, tell us the truth.
Close.
What is it we're looking at?
This panel is from it is indeed Supes or Superman. This panel is from a comic book called DC Comics Presents, and it's from issue 29, I think. And I think it's possibly 81 or 82, but I'm not sure. So the timeline is about right. It's not penciled by Jim Starlin. It's written by Jim Starlin. And it's drawn by a guy called Romeo Tangal, who's not a name to kind of conjure with, but he did loads of stuff. He did Green Lantern, and like he's a sort of a DC old hand, basically. And that is Superman talking to not the Phantom Stranger, but the Spectre.
Oh, sorry.
No, you were in the right sort of ballpark. And the words that are emanating from on high, it's interesting that you say that they look like thorns, because those are the words of God Almighty. Superman is being confronted by God Almighty. So yeah. So that those words that's why they're written in that sort of fancy serif font, because this is literally the word of God. Yeah. So do you want a bit of background on why I picked this panel and why this panel means so much?
Definitely.
Okay. So if I tell you up front that I'm a lapsed Catholic, that might give you some sort of hint. So at school, I read this. I didn't read this in DC Comics Presents. I read this in the Superman Annual 1983, I think it was. Beautiful book with a cover by Brian Boland. And at school, I'm having Catholic doctrine sort of drilled into me, that's what happens at Catholic school. And then at home, for fun, my mum has bought me like a DC comic, and she bought me this. And I read it, and it scared the hell out of me, because what happens in it is that Superman is flying around in space with Supergirl, his cousin. They get into a fight with a baddie called Mongol, who is sort of the DC version of Thanos. And they have such a big fight that Supergirl is knocked unconscious and blasted right out of the cosmos, right out of the universe entirely. And it's sort of a story about Superman's arrogance, that he believes that he has so much power that he should be able to save her. So he flies after her, he flies out of the universe, and then the Spectre gets in his way and stops him dead in his tracks and said, you can't go any further, because outside of this is the unknown, is the infinite. You're essentially trying to fly off the comic book page here, and that's not possible. And Superman completely loses his shit. He tries to punch the Spectre, and the Spectre's invulnerable, can't be stopped that way. So he says, by whose authority are you saying I cannot rescue my cousin, Supergirl? And the Spectre says, by the ultimate authority. And then God turns up. And Superman's like, what the fuck?
This,
And then God speaks up.
that's quite an extreme thing. I'm trying to
It's
think
huge.
when God has appeared in comics. I remember a Doctor Strange comic by Steve Englehart from the 1970s when
Yeah.
they had a sort of quasi creation of the universe, and they create a mock deity called Sissineg, which is Genesis backwards.
Genesis.
And that
Yeah.
caused a furore in the letters column from religious minded people who said that that was, even though they hadn't said it was God, they'd said something which was almost God, and that was bad enough.
Yeah.
But this, I mean, was there any kickback?
No, none whatever. Because the difference is that God has always been baked into the idea of the Spectre. The Spectre has always been his avenging angel on Earth. And we're talking about right back to the 1940s here, as far as I know. But as far as I've known the Spectre, he has always been God's agent. So God himself turning up was not a sort of a big deal. And they never really refer to him as such. Superman is like, is that who I think it is? And the Spectre's like, oh, yeah, you better believe it, sunshine.
I mean, Safi, did you have any religious upbringing?
No, don't ask me that. Yeah, I used to be part of a quite cult-like evangelical church for about 10 years.
Ooh.
Which I managed to deconstruct finally and get out of, which was terrible because you end up with all your friends in that bubble. And I was writing a work called Parables, looking at what the truth of the Bible was, the power of the stories in there. And I did masses of research into it. The more and more I digged into it, it's like, this doesn't really hold up. And I kind of deconstructed my whole faith and got out of it. I mean, the last person you expect to be part of that, but it just shows you can get pulled into things you think you'd never get pulled into. So I'm with religion now a bit like, oh no.
Yeah.
Fascinating for me that this comic coming as it does from America, which America is a much more religious country than this country has been for a long time. And you'd think that they would have steered clear of this sort of provocative content. I mean, don't people get more protected?
I don't know, but the weird thing is that Stalin himself is a hippie.
Yeah.
Well, quite hippie-ish kind of guy. So I don't imagine that he's terribly kind of gung-ho for God per se or religion as a whole. But not only is he a hippie, but if you read some of his later stuff, the Batman work he did, it's so right-wing and so like pro-Reagan and pro-vigilantism. It's weird. But I think he was just writing to whatever the kind of the form was at the time. And I think he deploys God here, not because he has any particular love or interest in God. I don't want to speak for the man. I don't know that. But because that would be a real, like, who can stop Superman really? This is the point. This is what they call the golden age Superman as well, or the pre-crisis Superman, who is completely invincible. Like, they descaled him and they depowered him as it went on, or post-crisis, I suppose, post about 1986. But back then he was essentially a god himself. So who can stop him really except God? And I think so it's more like a kind of a video game boss, kind of the ultimate video game boss, kind of stopping him in his tracks, you know.
As an atheist myself, it was quite a surprising thing for me when 10 years ago I was commissioned by Bible Society to do my Tales from the Bible. I started with the Book of Esther, and I've done the Book of Joseph, and I've done quite a few Bible stories since. Not being religious, I still have my view on what I expect of religions. And one of the big things, especially in the Old Testament, is that God is quite strict about depictions of himself. You're not even supposed to say his name. Lots of Orthodox Jews will only say Hashem. You won't say Yahweh or his name, because he says quite clearly, don't say my name. But these guidelines didn't become part of the DC Bible.
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. That's essentially what Stalin has done here is entirely respectful of what you said. He doesn't depict God, and no one refers to him by name. So he is depicted as, we see here, the word and the light. And that's, he's done that, because then Jim Starlin's a great thinker and a great writer. So that's why he would have done this so well. The thing about the ink spatter that you mentioned is very interesting. You say that no one does that anymore. I can assure you I still do that.
You're still old school. Actually,
You better believe it.
you guys are both old school with your art school,
Yeah.
with your artistic techniques.
Yeah.
So you can see where this might have messed me up at a certain age. I think I would have been about 6 when I read this, and after this, I don't think the other thing as well is that my mum and my dad had divorced at this point, and my mum bought me this and completely got it wrong, and my dad bought me Spider-Man comic and completely got it right, and so therefore I ended up loving my dad more than my mum. I can laugh about it now, but at the time it was terrible.
How many families have been divided by their
Oh,
choice of Marvel
yeah.
or
Like
DC?
it's almost sectarianism, Kev, in a way. You know what I mean? But so I chose the Spider-Man. I went down the Spider-Man path. So
Safi, were you DC or Marvel?
DC. But I didn't really get into comics until I went to, I'll show my age now. I went to Polytechnic and a friend of mine started showing me 2000 ADs. And I was like, oh, what's that? And I sort of got into 2000 ADs, really was one of the first comics I got into. Marvel and DC kind of came later. It's like, oh, there's other comics apart from 2000 ADs there. I was not really that interested until I sort of found more indie comics like Bone and Strangers in Paradise and things like that. It was like, oh, this is cool. So yeah, never really a huge superhero fan.
Yeah, for people of my age, the Marvel DC divide was helped by the fact that you got cheap reprints of Marvel comics every week, and you didn't get cheap weekly reprints of DC comics, and so they didn't sort of penetrate.
Yes, but where there's 2018, it was easy because it was in a newsagent, it still is. And Vertigo, I got really into Vertigo comics. Yeah, they were cool, especially like Shade the Changing Man and things like that. It was like, oh my God, this is really, really good with Bark and stuff.
At the time of that DC Comics Presents story that we've just been looking at, DC and Marvel Comics were big. I mean, they would still have been regularly selling, 150, 200,000 copies a month, do you think?
yeah, something like that. That's right. I think DC had just had a little bit of an implosion and were kind of slowly recovering. I think, and I suspect something like Superman the movie probably helped them out in that respect. Marvel was kind of eating their lunch though, really at that point. And for most of my lunch, for most of my life, Marvel has been eating DC's lunch, and it's only really flipped around recently that DC suddenly, because of a select few titles, is doing incredibly well, and Marvel has sort of receded. I did end up being going back a bit. I did end up being a lot more of a DC fan. I think because of what you said, Kev, that when I was very young, certainly in the 80s, Marvel reprints of in the UK were very readily available, and DC stuff was not. And then in the 90s, that kind of changed, and suddenly news agents were carrying American comics, and so you could try out a whole bunch of stuff. And I ended up getting like really, really into DC, like around the death of Superman and all that stuff.
I'm not entirely sure to what extent the film and TV adaptations actually boost the comics. I mean, I know, Dan, that you've been involved in a few things which spin off one from the other. Like you've done Planet of the Apes, the comics, which are almost entirely independent from the movies. I think the Planet of the Apes comics have gone on more consistently than the movies have.
Yeah, but the Planet of the Apes comic that I did was a direct tie-in to Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. The film, the second film in the kind of recent trilogy, and it was like directly. So I had to get all the likenesses right and make sure the world was consistent with that.
Right.
And then you're talking about Planet of the Apes as a kind of a secondary, or I suppose primary thing that is carrying on in its own sweet way. Planet of the Apes, working on that made me really sick. I got really ill. And I have a theory that if you're working on a comic that has a sort of unpleasant kind of vibe, it was really well written. It was a good comic, but everyone in it is sick. There's this plague that's going around that's killing humanity, and one of the lead characters throughout the entire book is kind of constantly. This was a while ago now. I'm sort of going from my memory a little bit. Like she's constantly like holding her nose, and she's like there's blood coming out, and I got more and more like I think I'm quite sensitive in that way. I got more and more sick as I was working on it. I ended up with like a really bad gallbladder infection, and I was in hospital, and I was so terrified of missing my deadlines. I said to my partner, "Bring in my artboard, and I'll work in the hospital bed." But they pumped me so full of drugs, and I was so sick I couldn't do it. And I thought, oh no, I'm going to lose this work. I'll never work again.
The readers have no idea what we go through.
They don't. That ball that we're constantly pushing up a hill.
I've got to say that I'm not entirely sure that across the board, this is the chicken and egg situation, the cause and causality. Otherwise, everybody doing a zombie comic would just simply die.
Right, no, that's true. That's true. But do you not feel that maybe they have died and they're just sort of like a zombie, just sort of shuffling through? They're just sort of going through the motions in the way that a zombie would.
Anybody who's been to a comic convention may come to that
There's some
conclusion.
truth to that, right? Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's not just the subject matter; it's the sort of the tone. Like zombie comics are usually quite sort of like fun and exciting. You know what I mean? They tend not to be terribly depressing. There's usually a great bit where someone busts out a shotgun and blows a zombie's head off, and there's a great kind of cathartic release from that. And this had no cathartic release. It was just people dying for 4 issues, and then at the end they die, and I just thought, oh man. This is too much. This is too heavy for me, man.
Do you know, one of the good things about this podcast is occasionally people can plug their comics and you'll go away thinking, I must look that comic up. I'm pretty sure nobody is now looking up your Planet of the Apes comics.
No, they'll love it. No, it's great. And also they have to respect how much genuine blood, sweat, tears, and other fluids I put into the project. Yeah, yeah, sorry. I apologize to whoever is publishing that. I mean, that's out of print. Don't worry about it. It's not going to be a problem. I think Boom published it at the time, and now Marvel has the license, and Marvel's owned by Disney, and Disney bought Fox. So it's really sort of fallen through a gap. So who cares?
Well, we've looked at a DC comic, which left us talking about a Marvel comic. Now, Sapphira, you have brought in a panel that I will confess from the start has foxed me. Let us have a look. And Dan, it's your turn to try and describe what you're looking at.
All right, it is a figure. I think a masculine figure, but a little bit androgynous, against a black background, holding what looks like either a sort of miner's lamp or a video recorder. I think there's a little microphone thing at the top. I think it is a video recorder. I think they're wearing a cap on backwards. And I've got a funny feeling this might be very early Paul Grist, or perhaps something from Deadline. It's got that sort of vibe to it. It's very graphic, very stylized, black and white, and really cool, really cool. I think it's British.
Before we find out where it's from, I'm just going to leap in with my panelology here. I shall describe, for the benefit of people who study these things, it is a black and white line drawing, printed in black and white, drawn, I would say, in ink on paper. It looks to be of the vintage in the style where that would be how it's done. Also, the video camera that the person is running along with is a 1990s or early 2000s style of video camera in the days before a phone. In the days even before the handheld camcorder, as we saw in Back to the Future. And the guy's wearing a pattern on his shirt, which is very stylized, but otherwise it's quite a cartoony style of drawing, not erring on the side of realism so much as erring on the side of stylization. I like that guess of Paul Grist. That could be the sort of guess I'd be making myself, or it could be Ilya, Ed Hillier, or it could be some other small press creator from Britain circa 1999. Sapphira, put us out of our misery. Who is it?
It was a good guess. Paul Grist was a good guess, but it was a guy called Nabal Kanan, and it was published by Caliber Comics in 1995. So you were not far, you were in the right kind of zone there. And this comic was called Exit. I don't know if you guys ever heard of that.
Exit from Caliber Comics.
Exit. Caliber Comics, 1995. I don't know. He is published in America. I don't actually know what nationality he is, but it was an American comic from Caliber. And it had like an Exit Series 1 and Exit Series 2. And I absolutely loved the art style. And it just looks very different, very stylized. And also does, especially, I'm sorry it's such a terrible pitch that I've just taken on my phone. You can't read it. But I love this style. I do this a lot in my comics, where you have lots of floating boxes.
What was the subject matter of Exit?
It was. I knew you could ask me that because I haven't actually read this since the 90s. But my memory of it was like school's out for summer. So hence you're right on the right track again with the cap on backwards. The kids, school's out, they're going off to have their summer holidays and adventures and things, and there's like a mystery and what's going on in this weird house and stuff. and this love stuff. But it's just, I found it such a simple but powerful style. And sometimes I get a bit, with the Soups comics. Some, not all of them, massive, brilliant ones, but some of them, they get, to me, so busy. And I love the contrast. It's like having a sorbet. I just love it.
Yeah.
And there was a whole load of them at the time. I remember I really, really got into these type of comics at that time. Paul Grist was actually one of them with his Kane, wasn't it? Kane comics. I loved them.
Yeah.
He had a very stark black and white.
I think this is a lovely panel. I think this is the sort of panel that's really, you cannot go wrong with, because, like you say, it's got that lovely, crisp, fresh feeling to it. And it's a lot of black, which I think always works in comics. A lot of black, very graphic, very stylized, very sharp. It's awesome. I love it. It's great. I particularly love the feet. I love how sort of limber and snappy that line is. The shoes, I suppose, rather than the feet, but it's great.
And I love the way that the boxes, they all sort of with everything about it, compositional wise, is just pleasing.
Yeah, that's right. It leads you around the page in a very nice way, doesn't it?
Exactly. How the lettering is done and where things are put.
Yeah.
If you could tell the story without overcomplicating it, you were telling the story faster, simpler, more directly.
And I always tend towards liking flat art. To me, it just feels more stylized and more arty.
This time in 1995 was also a time when the Marvel and DC comics and Image comics were getting very complicated. Computer coloring was new, and so you're getting more and more complication. At the time, I was doing Doctor Strange for Marvel around 1996, and we were being colored by Malibu Graphics. And I'd never seen so much colouring, so much time being spent on the colouring of a page. The sophistication.
Right. And it's that real sort of like slightly sloppy, gloopy kind of airbrush type effect as well. So everything is like really hyper rendered, and there's really nowhere for your eye to rest. So I think there is sort of a kind of slight connective tissue between the very early kind of comics I just showed the panel and this, because they have that sort of, the coloring is so flat, so you really can sort of enjoy the inks. And here, of course, it's all inks, and so you enjoy it on that level. It's great.
And you were getting a divergence. The Marvel and Image and DC work was starting to get more complicated. The Alex Ross's painted art was starting to appear. We were getting more Photoshop painted covers, whereas in the indie arena they couldn't do that, so they went, maybe in a lot of instances, the other way. We keep it simple. That's our strength. You can start making super shaped, super airbrush painted pages and go your way.
I think it's fascinating. I like I like comic art. I've always liked comic art, and obviously I do comic art, but I just like art as a subject wider than that. And the idea of empty space and where the eye's drawn to and focus and everything is vitally important to me. And I just feel a lot of comics these days that they're just too busy. It's like, where my eye's supposed to go? It's not just, we must info dump as much stuff and much dialogue in. You're like, just no.
And the other thing as well is that I think what's changed as well is that because lettering is put on now after the fact, there is this sort of temptation to kind of well, back in the day, you'd have to integrate. The artists would have to integrate the lettering in somehow. So you'd have to think more kind of compositionally. And now the composition goes back, and I'm speaking from experience here, the composition goes back as far as leave some space at the top of the panel for the letters, and we'll sort of bung them in. And it's not quite as good. It doesn't sit together kind of quite as pleasingly. You can tell. I wonder, did the artist write this as well? Are they a cartoonist? Did they do the whole thing?
Yeah. Same. This is what I like. This is what I do.
Yeah.
If you can write it and do the art, it's just, that gives you a lot of scope to do what you want to do. Some people still do. Tony Moore still does all his. Tony Moore, Strange Paradise. He still does all his, handwrites all his.
I could tell just from looking at this page. That this is a cartoonist, because this is exactly the sort of thing a cartoonist would do. There's a sort of you can tell they have deliberately left themselves a lot of room. It's a single page. They can get in a lot of kind of dialogue and then have fun with the composition as well. Like there's a lovely sense of freedom and excitement to it.
Yeah, I'm a fan of simplicity. It's no secret that my favourite current comic strip is Nap Comics by Rachel Smith. If you're not familiar with them, she shares them on Webtoons and shares them on social media. And it's just about her child growing up. She's been doing it since she was pregnant, and then her baby is about 3 years old now, and she does one every few days. The words and the outlines, the bubbles and the drawings, they're all straight on the page, and you keep it simple. You communicate the story very straightforwardly. You know, layers and complications just would get in the way.
Yeah.
Especially if you're doing, which is what I like, sort of comics that are zooming right in on sort of character studies of what's happened. You know, it's all about the person and the emotions they're going through and the story arc that they're going through. That's highly, you know, that I just think it's better. It's easier to do it in this kind of art style. It kind of sinks in with it. To me, it feels like a coherent way of doing that kind of story. Rather than, well, we're going to go and do a Marvel great big huge, you know, fight scene that's amazing. And I like that given the right day, but you know, that kind of almost lends to. I'm probably being totally heretical now because obviously there's some really, really good art in superhero comics, but I just think it works well. It works well with that kind of story.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Story that I like with Exit, where it's about some school kids, you know, falling in love over the summer holiday. There's a mysterious house and that kind of stuff, and it's all really around them. It just works with that kind of narrative.
But what I would also say is that I think one of the best loved comics of all time, one of the best loved superhero comics of all time, is The Dark Knight Returns, and that's Frank Miller taking a completely cartoonist's approach to superhero comics. So it all feels, for better or worse, it all feels like him, even though there are other inkers and somebody else lettered it and somebody else colored it and so on. He took a cartoonist approach. So he is writing it and he's drawing it. So it has some of this flavor where he entirely controls the narrative. He entirely controls the page, and he can take these big risks and try out strange things and take the character into really sort of unprecedented kind of territory. And I think it is still one of the best-selling superhero book of all time. Maybe after Watchmen, I don't know, but yeah. So I think this cartoonist approach, this auteur approach, if you like, if you want to be pretentious, I think it can pay sort of dividends in that space. You know.
I think so, definitely.
Well, we have been looking at a couple of very contrasting examples of comic work that have led us to a similar sort of end. We have been looking at Exit from Caliber Comics, written and drawn by Nabil Kanan from 1995, and DC Comics Presents with Superman and the Spectre, written by Jim Starlin, drawn by Romeo Tangal from approximately 1981. Thank you for bringing those in. Where can we find you guys on the socials? Sapphira, where do we find you?
You can find me on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok.
And we're looking out for the gloriously untrue adventures of Sapphira.
Yes. And then you're looking at it and going, I should have this in my house.
Exactly. And Dan, where do we look for you?
Well, I've just deleted my Twitter, so don't look for me on there. That's gone. But you can find me on Blue Sky. I know no one's on Blue Sky, but you can find me there. And I'm on Facebook and I'm on Instagram. And you just search my name. Or you can just go into a bookshop. I want to follow up what Sapphira said there. Just go into a bookshop and say, bring me anything by Dan McDaid, and I will pay money for that. And that money goes to me. I will have at least a portion of that money. And that really is the main thing. Don't worry too much about social media. Don't really engage with me on social media. I'm very entertaining. I'm a lot of fun, but I'm also quite annoying. So just don't bother. But go into your local bookshop, go into your local comic shop and ask for me by name.
And listener at home, you'll find me on the show notes and kevfcomicartist.com. But you knew that. Let's hear it again for my two guests, Sapphira Jane Olson and Dan McDaid.
Yes.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Hey, if you're enjoying this episode of Comic Cuts, the panel show, don't forget there's an entire back catalogue and a first season for you to catch up on. My guests have included comic folk like Brian Bolland, Rachel Smith, Metafrog, Gary Northfield, Nigel Octoloony, Nigel Parkinson, Laura Howell, Sonia Long, David Leitch. We've had the comics laureate Hannah Berry, resident alien creator Peter Hogan, podcasters like Adam Roach, legendary singer-songwriter Dean Friedman, Jessica Martin. The list of comedians includes Ashley Storey, Bethany Black, Will Hodgson, Paul Carenza, Izzy Lawrence, Doug Siegel. There is too many to list. And they've brought in comics from Marvel and DC to the Bunty and the Eagle, from Robert Crumb to Viz, webcomics, obscure manga, all points in between. And sometimes we don't talk about comics at all. Don't forget to click and subscribe, leave a review, and tell a friend. For example, what could these two be talking about?
With a swastika on his shirt, he's got his trousers down, his bum out, and he's standing with his feet in a bucket of pig shit on a stage. There's lots of people looking behind him, and he's saying, oh yes, I can feel it coming out now. Go on, fuck off out of it, you blasted queen.